Hi, James. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
No, Edward, it's an absolute pleasure. And like I say, I love this subject matter. I love the book. It's great, you look at it in a different angle, and we're going to get into that. This return to the golden age. I think that's where we're heading, Edward. I really do. I guess, the first thing that grabs me, my good friend Stephen Mailer, who I just came back from Egypt with, often talks about Barbara Han Clow, and she wrote a lovely foreword. Maybe just tell us why you got Barbara to write the foreword for the book.
Sure. I was highly inspired a few years ago on writing this book, and I wanted to link the present state of society today and what's going on today with the ancient past. And I was about midway through writing of Return of the Golden Age. I wasn't calling it that. I was calling it the coming global golden age. Is what I was calling it at the time. And at that time, Barbara had sent me a request to have a look at her book, Planetary Awakening. And I read her book, and I was floored by it. She inspired me so much.
Wow.
She helped me see that history, the actual experience of history, the drama of what happened to humanity is not really captured in traditional history courses and history textbooks. And that blew me away and propelled me to link the golden age of the past with the coming global golden age now. And so Barbara and I started a dialogue back and forth, and she got involved with the book just a little bit. She read it for me, she critiqued it for me, and she loved it. And I asked her, because she inspired me so, to write the foreword, and she did.
Wow, beautiful. Yeah, Barbara's a fascinating author for me, a fascinating person, and she really taps into something very unique. Of course, there's many people that inspired you for the book. You have great acknowledgements in there from all guests on the show. Graham Hancock, John Anthony West, Robert Schoch, Christopher Dunn.
Sure, it's a little bit about me. I've always been the type of guy and the young man, not a young man anymore, but when I was a young man, I always wanted to know why. Why is society the way it is? Why are we the way we are? Why is there Christianity? Why is there Islam? Why is there Buddhism? Why is there Hinduism? Why is there all these belief systems around the world? Why is society based on commerce? Why do we have war? Why do we have crime and poverty? Why do we have all this stuff? And at an early age, I came to the understanding that we people are actually made up of history. The history that we endure in our own lives is an actual history. Okay? But society and humanity has its own history, because each generation wants the next generation to be bigger and better. And this has been going on for a very, very long time, because people are people. People were people 10,000 years ago just as much as people are people today.
Sure.
Every generation wants their children to be better. So it started actually with Graham Hancock. I watched his show on the Discovery Channel, Quest for the Lost Civilization.
Wow, what a beautiful show that is.
And yeah, it was so fascinating. I had to run out and buy the video and buy the book. This was like 1996, 1997.
Yeah.
And I've always been a lover of history, and Graham got me going.
I love that era for Graham, by the way, Edward. That era that Graham was in then, he was thriving at his peak, still going strong, but different directions maybe now. But that was a wonderful era for alternative history.
Right, and he got me going. And then after doing my own research and reading and thinking for about 5 or 6 years, I just decided to tackle my own little project, which was getting into the first 10 chapters of Genesis in the Bible and trying to overlap what Genesis was saying with archaeology and geology, and trying to figure out what in this mythology is pointing to real events. And that got me in contact with John Anthony West. And then I started doing a second book, which is called Before the Pharaohs. And I came across Chris Dunn's book, and I was flabbergasted to find out that he only lived 30 miles away in Danville.
Wow. That's right. Yeah, that's right.
So we got together and actually wound up going to Egypt together in 2007.
Oh, beautiful. You know, Chris has been on a couple of times. You know what I like about Chris Dunn's work the most? He talks sense, and he's an engineer, and he wants to get, he's very open to a lot of things, but he's also, you know, wanting to concentrate on some core body of details. And, you know, I stand up and listen to Chris because I'm from an engineering background too, Edward. And, you know, the guy talks sense. He's got some meat and potatoes there, Edward.
Right. He's talking facts. He's talking physics. He's talking what is possible and what's not possible. And his book, the Giza Power Plant, it was a huge breakthrough because he was the first person to notice that the Great Pyramid was designed to be a machine.
Yeah,
a tomb.
Yeah, I just came back from Egypt, Edward. I was there a couple of weeks ago, and I was inside experiencing the acoustics of the Great Pyramid. I'm absolutely mind blown. I was in the Red Pyramid as well, and you know, I can't get over it. I was in the Serapeum as well, actually. That Chris was in the Serapeum as well, talking about how sophisticated that was, and he inspired me to get to the Serapeum. And I can't believe how high tech this stuff was. This was like a golden age, going back to, you know, when was this stuff even built? You know, this is the stuff I have questions over, Edward.
Right.
Tell me about your other book. Before I get into this, I just want to know about the 39,000 BC. Are we talking, is that an influence of John Anthony West, where he talks about these kings lists going back maybe longer than we're told?
Yeah, that's part of it. The main thrust behind coming back to the number 39,000 BC, that's directly from what the ancient Egyptians say themselves. It's in both the Turin Papyrus and the Palermo Stone, where they actually record themselves. It's their history, not ours. We ain't making it up. The ancient Egyptians actually recorded this, that before the first dynasty of Manes, there was approximately 13,000 years of rule by the followers of Horus. And before that, for some 23,000 years or so, it was ruled by the gods. So if you put it all together, the origin of Egypt prior to its first dynasty goes back to 39,000 BC. So that's where the title of that book actually comes from. But the book itself is more of an overview of Egypt than anything else. I have 9 chapters, and each chapter is about a specific thing that puts the evidence forth for 39,000 BC. Wow. There's a chapter on the Sphinx. There's a chapter on philosophy. There's a chapter on the stone at Abu Rawash, and there's different chapters. And there's one really good chapter on the original archaeology that went on in Egypt by Flinders Petrie in the later part of the 19th century. And some of the stuff that he was finding in the graves that he was unearthing, he was finding out that the older, deeper graves had bodies and ornaments that was much more sophisticated than the newer graves. So he was kind of perplexed at what was going on. But of course, in that day and age, you really had to follow the theology and the theories of Charles Darwin. You know,
That's right. He ruled the roost then, Edward, didn't he?
Yes, he did, and he still does to a certain extent in academia here.
Do you know
but not as much.
Yeah, but the wonderful thing about Flinders Petrie was, it's one of my favourite museums in the world, the Petrie Museum in University College London. Anybody's listening, by the way, get to the Egyptology Museum called the Petrie Museum at University College London, because what Petrie did, Edward, was he picked up all these bits that nobody else wanted, put them in and sent them back home, you know, and thank God, because we have like drill cores that are showing advanced machining with spiral grooves. And I know Chris concentrated on this. Chris Dunn concentrated a lot on this. And, you know, it's such a wonderful collection of strange artifacts. You know, it's thanks to Flinders Petrie for doing that.
Well, what's crazy about Flinders Petrie is in his book, he makes the conclusion that, hey, this work done in granite had to have been done by saws that were stuck with diamonds.
Yeah. Yeah,
I
I
mean,
have no
that was
doubt.
his conclusion, but he really didn't go anywhere with it.
Yeah, I guess at the time, when we're talking the late 1800s, turn of the century, but I guess, he couldn't go anywhere with it in terms of, he was in a different era, basically, to what we are today. Nowadays, I mean, in our own advancement of machining and engineering, as Chris would talk about, I'm an engineer. I look at it as well and I go, look, it's a no-brainer for me, but I'm from an engineering background. I've seen stuff in Giza that is so bizarre. It's screaming out high technology machining, and it's screaming out in an advancement, either in technology or philosophy, that we really don't know anything about, Edward.
That's correct. Even other engineers that aren't into this alternative history. For example, my brother-in-law's brother was a nuclear engineer, and he worked at Illinois Power. Okay, so he has a deep background in engineering. And a few years ago, we were just talking occasionally when my book 39,000 BC came out. And Alan, he's 65 years old now. And we were talking about it. And he looked at me and he said, you know what? I always knew by watching these shows on Egypt that the pyramids could never have been built by hand. They had to have tools and machines to do it. Mm-hmm. So even people that really aren't into it, that have an engineering background, see the evidence for what it really is.
Yeah, for sure. So Edward, okay, let's say civilizations 40,000 BC, they talk about this processional fall from grace, this fall from a golden age. They talked about it. They wrote about it on the Palermo stone, the King's List, going back many centuries than we even officially accept in the Egyptological academic world, who hold all the cards with an iron fist at the moment. However, what I like about you is that you're concentrating on this 12,000 years ago, this 10,000 BC era, as we say, that this was an incredibly interesting time geologically with the ending of the Ice Age, this fall from grace, I have no doubt that mankind pretty much was wiped out, some cataclysmic event, and had to start again. I guess let's talk about that, Edward, as a focal point, because that's where the book is at today, The Return of the Golden Age. We're talking about an event 12,000 years ago. I don't even know if it's like a comet or the end of the Ice Age or what I don't know what the mechanism was that started that event. I'm open to suggestion. I know Hancock's talking about maybe a comet now. He's coming out with a new book. I don't think it really matters. I think the most important thing is that the ice caps melted, Edward, and we had flooding, and we had this event of some sort that really, most of the stuff would have been scoured out. We would have had to start again. And maybe just talk about that now, Edward, from
Sure.
12,000 years ago onwards.
Sure. The archaeological, there's some good archaeological evidence that points to exactly what happened. This work was done, probably a decade ago or so, and it started like this. Archaeologists that were working in the northeastern part of the United States, of North America, were unearthing mammoths, skeletons, and tusks, and saber-toothed tigers, and then other animals from 12,000 years ago or more. And they came across a large problem, is that when they ran their radiocarbon dates on these remains, they were coming up with very goofy numbers. They were a whole lot younger than they were supposed to be,
Wow.
as opposed to the same remains in other parts of North America. And after working on the problem for several years, they came to the conclusion that the only way these remains could have been altered to depict a very young age is that a nuclear explosion happened 12,000 years ago. That's the conclusion they came to with the evidence. And then when they dug more, they found a thin black line in the stratum. That was more evidence that something really, really bad happened. And they also found out more that actually embedded in tusks were fine particles that were flying through the air. So the evidence point to our planet was radiated. Now, by what? That's the big question.
Would the comet do that?
No, a comet wouldn't do that. A comet would actually be part of what happened, but it wouldn't be the actual cause of what happened.
Wow.
Wow. There's several theories on what happened. All involve radiation. And the best theory that I like is the Vela star system. And this is actually, astronomers actually know this is fact. And astronomers have actually taken pictures of the explosion that's still going on. Shrapnel is still, and when I say shrapnel, I'm referring to elements of the star. Shrapnel is still moving away from the Vela system in all directions.
Wow.
But getting back on track, to me, I like the theory that a star in the Vela system went type 2 supernova 12,000 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And it shot plasma. And when I say plasma, I'm talking about the elements of this star is so hot that all the nuclear binding is broken, and you have loose, fast-moving electrons, neutrons, and different particles. It's so hot. We're talking millions of degrees. Wow. Anyway, this big ball, this planetoid size of shrapnel, shoots from the Vela system, which is a fairly nearby system, and comes through our solar system and knocks our planets all around and does a close flyby of Earth. Okay, so the Earth gets a great big shot of gamma radiation, and it seems to be that ground zero is the Great Lakes area. Okay, wow. And that's actually what happened. But behind that, what's going to happen when you have this immense plasma cloud coming through our solar system, it's going to push in debris and asteroids and comet that's already around our solar system. So the inner planets are going to be inundated with comets and asteroids and debris and dust. Dust is going to encircle the sun. It's going to be used as fuel. It's going to heat up the sun, and you're going to have more solar flares. So it's going to be hell on earth is what's going to be.
Sure. Yeah, I think sometimes the people might want a simple answer, and sometimes there isn't a simple answer, Edward. It's most likely a little bit more complex than that. I guess then, okay, so we have a source for the nuclear explosion. That's going to, pretty much decimate life on Earth. It's going to really reduce the population down. It's going to really push us into hunter-gatherer mode, Edward?
That's correct. Well, let's just pretend that it happened today. This is a really good way to talk about it. Okay. Our society is so complex today with so many economic levels. You have the grocery store, you have gas stations, you have truckers trucking food and petrol to the stores and to the stations. We have a very complex society. If a large asteroid would hit today like it did 60 million years ago in Chicxulub, okay, it would destroy 90% of the people on the planet. Okay, so that 10% of the people, how long is the food in the grocery stores going to last? How long is the fuel in the gas stations going to last? It's not going to take very long that there's going to be no food, no water, no gas. That first generation is going to hang on to the traditions that we had. But of course, life is going to go forward. We're going to find wives. We're going to reproduce. We're going to create babies. We're going to create the next generation. But as the generations move forward, what happened in the past is going to become not important, because survival is going to be the main priority, and survival is going to be hunting and gathering.
Sure. In a way, the infrastructure is really our enemy. In a way, whether that's the electrical grid or the road networks feeding the grocery stores, as you say, we're stuck in an infrastructure and that's all the infrastructures that's in Western civilization. That's probably our greatest enemy.
That's correct. And about a decade ago or so, we had a sneak peek at what would happen. There was a problem in Quebec. I can't remember exactly what happened, but Quebec got hit by some kind of cosmic interference, and it knocked out their power grid, and it was during the winter. And within a week, there was no heat. And within a week, people were chopping up their expensive furniture, burning their expensive furniture just to stay warm. Now, they took care of the problem soon thereafter, and Quebec got online to the power grid again. But that little sneak peek was very ominous.
Yeah. You know, and I don't think it was a big event either. It was something relatively small. I mean.
Correct, right.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, you know, I think people think we're very, very stable in this world. And, you know, I don't think we are, Edward, in a modern sense. I guess looking back into the ancient world, I want to get into some of the history and the philosophy, but let's concentrate on the 3000 BC era for a minute, which is the accepted Egyptological dating system. And these guys coming into existence, if they weren't existing beforehand, I'm not going to go into that at the minute, but let's say 3000 BC, mainstream Egyptology, they all accept this. What they don't accept is how highly advanced these guys were. They don't accept how philosophically attuned these guys had to be building monuments or to carving statues or to, you know, doing medicine and, you know, all the wonderful stuff they had, all their trappings of their civilization, you know, was very, very philosophically in tune. They were in harmony with nature and mathematics and science and, you know, beauty. Everything was just like, you know, they had all the products for anything they ever wanted. You know, it was an abundant, philosophical living nature that they had. These guys had to be pretty balanced and pretty smart to have that, Edward. Would you not agree?
Absolutely. Dynastic Egypt lasted for about 3,000 years. No other civilization, empire, or nation state has even come close to lasting for 3,000 years. So there was something very important that went on back 3,000 years ago, or 5,000 years ago now, before, to make Egypt what it was with the high philosophy and the high technology. Mm-hmm. And it's my conviction that, and this is based on modern times too, whenever you find a civilization that has high philosophy, mm-hmm. you're also going to find a civilization that has high technology.
Yes.
They go hand in hand, okay? Because philosophy is the precursor to high technology. You have to have high philosophy to have that desire and that knowledge to study nature. And through studying nature and finding out the natural principles of the world we live in, you can come up with technology. Mm-hmm. Now, what happened in ancient Egypt, what I'm convinced happened, is that 12,000 years ago, the Egyptians knew it was coming. They could see it in the sky, okay? And they prepared for it. And, of course, the ground zero was the Great Lakes, which is, you know, kind of the opposite side of where Egypt is. But, you know, the whole planet was affected to some degree because we have 55% of all mammals alive at that time went extinct. So something very bad happened.
Yeah.
But Egypt survived, okay? And they struck out to recreate civilization. So it's my conviction, and here I'm kind of falling into the same line of thinking as Graham Hancock, where he kind of dates the Giza Plateau at about 10,500 BC in that area. I think Thomas Brophy also does at that same time period, mm-hmm. that the survivors actually built the 10 true pyramids in Egypt as an energy system, as a crop fertilizer system, to kind of re-kickstart civilization. They had the high philosophy and the high technology to do so. Mm. Okay. This also brings in Dr. Schock's work and John Anthony West at dating the Sphinx to be much older than 2500 BC, closer to 10,000 BC. Mm. So what happened as time moves forward, the high technology is lost because there's really no need for it anymore. Life is about survival, okay? And when the generation that had the high technology died off, that technology was not carried forward. However, the philosophy, okay, was carried forward from generation to generation. So the philosophy survived, and after enough time, the population was built back to where civilization could really reach a threshold and recreate itself again around 3000 BC. This is why we see dynastic Egypt being such a knowledgeable, educated civilization.
Wow. Of course, you mentioned the crop stabilization of the pyramids. Maybe just mention a little bit about John Burke and some of his. I don't think John Burke's with us anymore, is he? I think he's gone now.
I don't know. Has he passed on?
I think he has, and I kind of might have found that out on another show. I was talking to somebody, but yeah, he had a great interest in pyramids and how they germinated seeds and what the effect. I think he experimented with agriculture at.
Yes, he did.
I think he put the seeds at the top of activated pyramids, and they seem to have a bigger, higher yields when he planted.
That's correct. And this was the basis for his theory. Excuse me. He found out that if you expose the seeds to slow-moving free electrons, ionized atmosphere, okay, that the seeds react to the radiation as if it's an inoculation. It actually makes the seeds stronger, more able to resist dryness and famine and disease. It actually made the seeds stronger, and the plants actually grew better and had a higher yield. Okay, and then this was just simply exposing the seeds to slow-moving electrons. Well, he discovered, and this was a test, a scientific test that he did I know he did it in England. I know he went to Stonehenge and did it, and through various sites throughout Europe and in the Americas at Cahokia. And what he found out is the ancient peoples understood this principle. And they were using the natural contours of the earth and building stone monuments to get this effect and to fertilize their crops. That's what they were doing.
Wow. I think like concentrated energy centers or.
Right. It's very subtle. I mean, if we human beings walk through these energy fields, we can't feel it, we can't smell it. You might, if someone's really sensitive, they might sense that it's there, but it's just really totally invisible, but it works.
See, as an engineer, this is what gets me. I accept this. I have no problem with John Burke's work and the research because it's, measurable, it's quantifiable. It just gets me all the time, Edward. It captures me in a mysterious sense that how could the ancients be so advanced with their philosophy to capture this, like to know this knowledge? These guys were so sophisticated, Edward. It gets me all the time. I lose myself in my imagination. I'm totally captivated. These guys were so sophisticated, Edward.
Yes, and they were actually using the planet itself and the natural occurring cycles of the planet to create their own energy.
Yeah, exploiting the natural abilities of nature, really, to their own deeds, and in a way, not really taking anything more out of the land than they needed.
Right. Exploitation is kind of really the wrong word to use. They were actually building these things and doing these things in harmony with nature.
Yeah, just using it as a bit of leverage, maybe.
Right. So, yeah, there's only two ways to go with this. You either, one, have to believe ancient aliens came here and taught them everything, or you have to believe that we as a people, as a humanity, came to a high civilization many tens of thousands of years ago. Yeah. And that civilization was destroyed, but some of that knowledge was passed forward. Sure. I tend to believe the latter.
Yeah, me too. I like to go down the human ingenuity route first. I mean, I'm open to both, but there's no reason to explore the human ingenuity route first. Get there first. Accept what we can do. Look at the present knowledge in front of you before you drop your brains out. Don't go and drop your brains out because it's an easy option. Look at the evidence first. There's enough evidence there, Edward. There's enough evidence there to look at first. At least raise your bar that way. I guess, look, let's talk about Epic of Gilgamesh, Plato's Atlantis. These are very interesting documents because they talk about this ancient epoch in a way, some sort of event that has happened. Just use that as a benchmark, and then maybe lead us into what that did to humanity.
Right. Well, Gilgamesh, the Epic of Gilgamesh, wasn't discovered until just like I don't know, 120 years ago or so. At that time, in geology, I know this is going to sound strange, but it's actually true. Before Charles Darwin, and Darwin wasn't the first one to come up with evolution. There was several guys before him. I can't remember their names. One was Lyell, and another one was Lamarick or something like that. But there was a group of scientists that saw this principle of evolution, and that happened around the middle of the 19th century, late mid-19th century. But before that, geology, the whole concept of geology revolved around the Bible. I know it's strange to talk about in this day and age, but it actually did.
True, rather, yeah.
So, at that time, the story of Noah's flood was the great explainer to why the planet looks the way it is. Okay. And, anyway, I believe it was Rollins found, the Gilgamesh story at Nippur, in Mesopotamia. And they discovered that the Gilgamesh story, which is an epic, is like 20,000 words. The Noah story in the Bible is really quite short. It's only maybe like one page, maybe like a couple thousand words. But the Epic of Gilgamesh was huge. It's like 20,000 words, and this epic is explaining the entire saga of what happened. And we today, we try and read things as a fact that Gilgamesh was actually a person. Okay, that all these people, all these figures in the Gilgamesh story, Venus, Ishtar, Humbaba, that these were actually people, and they were playing out this story. Mm-hmm. Well, that's the entirely the wrong way of looking at the story, because the ancient peoples were telling history as a story, and they were using metaphors to explain what they were doing. They were using great symbolism, and some of the history experts in mythology that actually study ancient Sumer and Mesopotamia and the Akkadian Empire, they understood that the Sumerians were very adept at astronomy and astrology, and that they were using planets. The characters were actually planets. Okay, Ishtar was Venus. Humbaba was Mercury. There's also the great cedar forest where there's the giant bull. These are all celestial things. Okay, they're not terrestrial at all. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And what's fascinating about the actual Gilgamesh is, in the context of the story, the characters are celestial bodies. And we have Gilgamesh, who is half human and half God. Okay, so he's a little bit of both. And then the second main character is Enkidu, which is an animal that has become human. And the context of the story is that Enkidu is not eternal. He has to die. Okay? And Gilgamesh is eternal and continues on. Now, what I see fascinating about that, what I see in the story, mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. is that it is a way of explaining that the planet itself is alive. Mm. Our planet Earth is represented by the character Gilgamesh. Humanity is represented by the character Enkidu. Wow. That's what's really, really important. And if you read the story closely and think in terms of celestial bodies and celestial events, not terrestrial events, you can see that the entire saga of Gilgamesh is about a great celestial storm that almost kills Gilgamesh mm-hmm. as a living being. But it doesn't. He escapes.
A celestial allegory in a way.
Correct.
Wow. You know, okay, so we're talking about this deluge, melting ice caps, floods, cosmic events, this pretty much put us back into a low level of humanity. This is where things are scarce. You're fighting for your survival. You're fighting to live. Scarcity of, you basically just want food first and foremost.
Yeah.
It's your basic necessity. We're going down to base level again. It's like, forget your maths, forget your science, forget your high technology. You've lost it all. You just need to eat every day. So we went into this, we went from peace and abundance to scarcity. Let's talk about that sort of philosophy and how we're kind of scarred still today in that, Edward.
That's correct. That's actually what happened. I've been thinking about why society is the way it is for a very long time, probably since I was about 16, 17 years old. And I really only truly got my answer just a few years ago. That's how I was writing this book. If you look at society today,
sure,
we people have this fetish, this complex. We have to dominate other people and resources. Okay, we have to. That's what we do. The question is, why? Why do we do that? Okay, if you look at Western Europe over the past 500 years, the Europeans have come to dominate 4 of the 6 habitable continents of the planet. Why? Why do we have to dominate? I mean, it's not even just. I'm not picking on Western Europe. If you go look in Africa and look at Asia and other parts of the world, there's this deep desire to dominate people and resources.
That's right.
And it creates war. Well, why did this happen? Why did it start?
It is a resource, exactly. It's not necessarily money. People would maybe concentrate on the money, but money is a resource. Money equals gold. Money equals oil. They're 2 major resources, and there may be economic resources, but food is another resource. It's like, the domination is resource based. Right.
That's absolutely correct. And if you start looking at history, I mean regular history that you can find in any world history textbook, in any college or any high school, if you start looking at world history, you start seeing that our entire history as a civilization is all about domination of resources. Okay, you can go all the way back to the very first empire, which was the Akkadian Empire, around 3000 BC. It was an empire that was forged by Sargon the Great in about 2500 BC, and it was all about war. And since that time, it's been nothing but war. After Sargon the Great, you have the Great Babylonian Empire. Then you have the Empire of Persia and the Medes. Then you have the Empire of Greece. Then you have the Empire of Rome, which actually takes us up to date because we are the vestiges of the Roman Empire of 1,000 years ago. Okay.
Exactly.
Rome is what created the culture in Europe.
Yeah.
That made Europe become what it is, and then the Europeans crossed the Atlantic and came to America, and just it only took a few hundred years, and the Europeans totally dominated North and South America. Yeah. So this domination idea, this expansion of culture, invasion of lands, and taking over of culture is what we've been doing for 5,000 years. And it actually has a starting point, and that starting point goes back to about 8,000 BC in the Caucasus Mountains, the steppe lands of Russia. That's where you find the first vestiges of the domestication of horse and cattle and the forging of swords and spears. And you find the philosophy of the sky god and the father god. That's where it all started. It was long before the Bible.
Wow.
Wow,
that's interesting. Let's talk about the sky gods and this, into the origins of the Western belief system. You have a great chapter in this in the book. This is fascinating for me.
Oh, the sky gods. This is where we have to merge a little bit of mythology with religion. And I have to mention a man by the name of David Talbot. He's a mythologist. He's a comparative mythologist. And he's been working on this problem for the past his book, The Saturn Myth, came out in, I believe, 81 or 82. So he's been working on this problem since the mid-70s. And he has really, really done his homework on this. He has several documentaries out that are very good. I highly recommend everyone watching them. The most fascinating one is called Symbols in the Sky. But anyway, he looks at all the mythologies, and all the mythologies are different around the world. You've got Norse, you've got Greek, you've got Egyptian, you've got Sumerian, you've got Akkadian, you've got Hebrew, and you have Native American Indians in North America and South America. Mm-hmm. And all these mythologies look different, but they all have the same underlying archetypes in them. Yeah. Something very bad happened 12,000 years ago, a very long time ago. And whatever bad happened affected our planet. But the biggest question is, who were the gods? Okay. And when you start mapping all these mythologies together and start erasing the detail and looking at the underlying archetypes, and then start looking at the symbols that people drew, in the southwest of America, in Mesopotamia, that there's very, very common themes of what they were looking at in the sky. And he's come to the conclusion that, why did the Sumerians know about Mars, Venus, Mercury, Saturn? How did they know this? You can't see any of these planets today in the night sky. You could see Mars last month because it was close to Earth. But when you saw Mars, it was a little bitty pin dot that was red. No one knows about any other planets. Well, he came to the conclusion that in order for these mythologies to be authentic, and which they have to be because they are our history, these mythologies are humanity's first memories, actually, that have been handed down for many thousands of generations. What had to happen to create these stories? And he came to the conclusion that the planets themselves were in a very different orbit than they are today. And this destruction, this fireball coming through our solar system, is what broke up the planets. But what our ancient ancestors were looking at beyond 12,000 years ago is you could actually see Venus and Mars and Saturn in the nighttime sky, bigger than the moon that we see today. Mm-hmm. Okay? These were the gods. So what happened in the mythology, the main theme is the death of gods. That's the main theme. And when you start looking at Egypt and how Egypt tried to study the night sky, it was almost as if they were terrified by the night sky. They were studying the night sky from the very beginning. And this is where the myth of Osiris comes in. Sure. The constellation of Orion. And if you look at the long-term trajectory of Egyptian beliefs, they started with the night sky, and they slowly gave up the night sky for the daytime sky. And they did that because the gods had disappeared. The gods died. This is captured most of all in the myth of Hathor and the Eye of Ra. It's an Egyptian myth. Wow. And briefly, it states that Ra, who represents the sun god, became upset at humanity, and he wanted to destroy humanity. So he sent Hathor as his eye to go and destroy humanity. And while she was destroying humanity, he changed his mind. Okay, and he sent a message to the priests to mix beer and blood and pour it in the fields. That way Hathor will see the blood, drink the blood, become drunk, forget about what she's doing, and save mankind. Okay, they did that, and mankind was spared. But, in the end, Saturn, or Ra, decided he had to flee anyway. And when Saturn fled, the stars were born. Now, that's a very, very important statement
Mm.
because Saturn has its own luminosity. Okay, it's not as bright as the sun, and it doesn't generate as much heat as the sun.
Mm-hmm.
But Saturn has its own luminosity, and if Saturn was orbiting in the same pathway nearby Earth, its luminosity would block out the stars, just like a large city today. You know, if you were to go to Chicago or to New York or to any large city around the world, you won't be able to see the stars because the luminosity from the night lights of the city blocks out the stars.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of the same principle.
Mm-hmm. So
this myth of Hathor and the Eye of Ra is explaining that the stars were born when Saturn went away, when Saturn got kicked out of orbit close to Earth, which makes absolute sense. That's why the ancient Egyptians were terrified of the night sky. They had never seen the night sky before. They didn't know those stars were there. To them, they could see Saturn, they could see Venus, they could see Mars. Those were the gods.
Wow.
Okay. And when they got broken up and went away, all of a sudden there's a night sky with all these stars. And the sky is spinning and it's changing very, very slowly. They figured out precession of the equinoxes long before 3000 BC.
Into something very unique. Of course, there's many people inspired you for the book. You have great acknowledgements in there from all guests on the show: Graham Hancock, John Anthony West, Robert Schoch, Christopher Dunn.
Sure, it's a little bit about me. I've always been the type of guy and not a young man anymore, but when I was a young man, I always wanted to know why. Why is society the way it is? Why are we the way we are? Why is there Christianity? Why is there Islam? Why is there Buddhism? Why is there Hinduism? You know, why is there all these belief systems around the world? Why is society based on commerce? Why do we have war? Why do we have crime and poverty? Why do we have all this stuff? And at an early age, I came to the understanding that we people are actually made up of history. The history that we endure in our own lives is an actual history. Okay? But society and humanity has its own history because each generation wants the next generation to be bigger and better. And this has been going on for a very, very long time because people are people. People were people 10,000 years ago just as much as people are people today.
Sure.
Every generation wants their children to be better. So, and I was flabbergasted to find out that he only lived 30 miles away in Danville.
Wow. That's right. So, yeah, that's right.
So we got together and actually wound up going to Egypt together in 2007.
Oh, beautiful. You know, Chris has been on a couple of times. You know what I like about Chris Dunn's work the most? He talks sense and he's an engineer and he wants to get, he's very open to a lot of things, but he's also, you know, wanting to concentrate on some core body of details. And, you know, I stand up and listen to Chris because I'm from an engineering background too, Edward. And, you know, the guy talks sense. He's got some meat and potatoes there, Edward.
Right. He's talking facts. He's talking physics. He's talking what is possible and what's not possible. And his book, the Giza Power Plant, it was a huge breakthrough because he was the first person to notice that the Great Pyramid was designed to be a machine.
Yeah,
a tomb.
Yeah, I just came back from Egypt, Edward. I was there a couple of weeks ago and I was inside experiencing the acoustics of the Great Pyramid. I'm absolutely mind blown. I was in the Red Pyramid as well, and you know, I can't get over it. It was in the Serapeum as well, actually. That Chris was in the Serapeum as well, talking about how sophisticated that was, and he inspired me to get to the Serapeum. And I can't believe how high tech this stuff was. This was like. And
I was about midway through writing of Return of the Golden Age. I wasn't calling it that. I was calling it the coming global golden age is what I was calling it at the time. And at that time, Barbara had sent me a request to have a look at her book, Planetary Awakening. And I read her book, and I was floored by it. She inspired me so much.
Wow.
She helped me see that history, the actual experience of history, the drama of what happened to humanity is not really captured in traditional history courses and history textbooks. And that blew me away and propelled me to link the golden age of the past with the coming global golden age now. And so Barbara and I started a dialogue back and forth, and she got involved with the book just a little bit. She read it for me, she critiqued it for me, and she loved it. And I asked her, because she inspired me so, to write the foreword, and she did.
Wow, beautiful. Yeah, Barbara's a fascinating author for me, a fascinating person, and she really taps.
It started actually with Graham Hancock. I watched his show on the Discovery Channel, Quest for the Lost Civilization.
Wow, what a beautiful show that is! And
yeah, it was so fascinating. I had to run out and buy the video and buy the book. This was like 1996, 1997.
Yeah.
And I've always been a lover of history, and Graham got me going.
I love that era for Graham, by the way, Edward. That era that Graham was in then, he was thriving at his peak. Still going strong, but different directions maybe now. But, that was a wonderful era for alternative history.
Right. And he got me going. And then after doing my own research and reading and thinking for about 5 or 6 years, I just decided to tackle my own little project, which was getting into the first 10 chapters of Genesis in the Bible and trying to overlap what Genesis was saying with archaeology and geology, and trying to figure out what in this mythology is pointing to real events. And that got me in contact with China and the West. And then I started doing a second book, which is called Before the Pharaohs. And I came across Chris Dunn's book. Hi, James. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
No, Edward, it's an absolute pleasure. And like I say, I love this subject matter. I love the book. It's great, you look at it in a different angle, and we're going to get into that, this return to the golden age. I think that's where we're heading, Edward. I really do. I guess, the first thing that grabs me, my good friend Stephen Mailer, who I just came back from Egypt with, often talks about Barbara Han-Clow, and she wrote a lovely foreword. Maybe just tell us why you got Barbara to write the foreword for the book.
Sure. I was highly inspired a few years ago on writing this book, and I wanted to link the present state of society today and what's going on today with the ancient past.